Good evening. Welcome to the tropical update for September 10th, 2020. As always, these thoughts are mine alone, and in making decisions regarding the several systems we have to watch here, please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local weather office, and your local officials for all the latest regarding your area. Well, we have reached the climatological peak of an already very active hurricane season here. And we have quite a bit to talk about. We have several systems here, one in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, one just northeast of the Bahamas, Tropical Storm Paulette here in the central Atlantic, Tropical Storm Rene here, also just trailing the Tropical Storm Paulette, and another invest here that may get designated here in a bit. And then we have another system following that. These systems, this general area, Paulette, the Bahamas system, and the Gulf of Mexico system are what we're going to be talking about today. Renee must feel lonely because we're not going to be talking about that one, but all of which will be threatening land at some point in time within the next 7 days. Let's start this very long discussion. Well, we have Tropical Storm Paulette here in the central Atlantic. It has taken on a rather sheared appearance. You can see the lower level circulation is removed from the mid-level circulation here, and that is due to the mid-level shear that is evident on these clouds that are to the west of the system. You can see all these cloud tops are getting blown off to the east, and these are not very high cloud tops. These are mid-level storms that are getting blown into the system, and this is largely due to a trough here that we can see on water vapor imagery. You have this very large trough that has dug down into the Atlantic and is beginning to cut off from the overall streamer here, if you may, that has draped into the Atlantic. And this is partially due to Paulette's thunderstorm outflow to the north, and this will eventually cut off and will decay as it moves generally to the southwest here towards Hispaniola and the Caribbean. And as this does that, Paulette will be kind of rotating around this trough here and will eventually be more in line with the overall upper level flow. This is evident on the GFS model. This is evident on the GFS model here. We have the trough here, very large, that is kind of pinwheeling Paulette around it. And as this progresses, you can see that this trough begins to kind of get pushed away by what may be some outflow coming out of Paulette, and actually begins to enhance the outflow from Paulette. And you can see that really comes into action here as it begins to deepen quite a bit upon approach to Bermuda, which is right in here. And you can see that the system is able to really kind of develop a very powerful outflow channel out to the west, and this is largely due to the trough that you can see and the cutoff low, upper level low that will eventually form out of this trough. And so the system is expected to intensify quite a bit. Now, if we go to the vorticity, this is very evident. You can see within 48 hours, it is a pretty strong tropical storm here, but it does end up organizing and consolidating quite a bit in about 24 hours after that shot. And you can see a very large and possibly powerful hurricane approaching Bermuda here. They haven't had one in a while, but this one may cut it a little close. On the GFS model run, it does actually end up going to the west of Bermuda. If we look at the overall track forecast, you can see that that is a possibility here. Bermuda is a pretty hard target to hit, but as this continues, it could either go west or east of the island, and regardless, it should be watched for a legitimate concern that this could be a hurricane approaching Bermuda on Monday and could be rather close to the island. And regardless, there will be heavy surf along most all of the east coast, and especially for Bermuda, as this will likely be a pretty large system by the time that it is up here because of the latitude that it is at. You can see this is very evident on the GFS. You have a very large wind field of 30-knot winds here associated with Paulette as it moves around Bermuda. So this would likely provide a lot of surf for most of the mid-Atlantic into the Carolinas here. And so probably some rip current threat that is with this as it moves up into the mid-latitudes and kind of just becomes a rather powerful and large hurricane. Thankfully, away from land for the most part, but it could be very close to Bermuda, so it is worth talking about. Next one. All right, we have a couple of systems here that are in the vicinity of the Gulf of Mexico, both of which are expected to track through the Gulf of Mexico in the next couple of days. We have our first little area of interest. This is not expected to develop too much, but it is worth noting because it is close to land and could possibly develop. These little ones are tricky and are hard to really pin down on exactly how much they're going to do. Our other one is quite the opposite. It is very large and is a large moisture pool and generally a mid-level presence here that has been evident for the past couple of days. This was originally associated with 94L, which is now inland over North Carolina and did not develop. But this could eventually generate a lower level circulation, and that is kind of loosely evident here. There's, a dent in the easterly flow here to the north of the mid-level center here. So it may be trying to translate some vorticity down. This is not a fast process as it takes a lot of thunderstorms to really do this. These thunderstorms will continue to fire and then will collapse, and this process will repeat itself, for several days as the storm begins to try to tighten up here. And this is not going to be moving really fast, so this kind of benefits the storm in a way. So it would be able to develop a lower level vorticity maximum well before it impacts, potentially the central Gulf Coast and Florida here. But right now what Florida should be expecting is a lot of enhanced rainfall, as this is a very large blob of moisture. If we look at the GFS model here, if we go back a little bit, you can see our entity around 48 hours is stretched over Florida. There's a little bit of a vorticity maximum near Grand Bahama Island, but overall it is not very consolidated, and this kind of continues. And you can actually see some of this vorticity, which is generated by concentrated thunderstorms in the overall envelope of the system. And so that is able to concentrate the overall vorticity. You can see this vorticity is very circular and does develop. We had a similar situation with Hannah earlier in the year, where we had, a system that continued to struggle with its thermodynamic environment, but really didn't have anything else opposing it, so it eventually was able to intensify as it gradually moistened its environment to where it was able to strengthen quite a bit into a hurricane. But I don't know if that is going to be the same thing for this system, as it doesn't have as much time as Hannah did. It does have 5 days before it does eventually make its final landfall of sorts. But regardless, if you're on the central Gulf Coast, anywhere from the areas impacted by Laura all the way into Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, you should be watching this as this does come into view here, and it will be very interesting to see what exactly goes down with this system. If we look at the upper level environment, generally speaking, this is a very favorable environment for a system in here, and there's not a whole lot of shear in this area. But if it were able to be deeper, it would likely be nudged a little further to the south and maybe able to creep into the areas that were impacted by Laura, which would be awful, and we do not want that at all. So let's hope that it stays weak and ends up being nothing for the Gulf Coast. And now let's get back to the broad shot here. If we look at the wave that has just emerged off of Africa here, you can see already it has a pretty evident mid-level circulation here. I'm not going to have a good close satellite shot of this right now because there's not a floater over it, but you can see that this is a complicated system. We have several entities that are kind of surrounding the system. You have a vorticity maximum here, vorticity maximum further to the east, and then another vorticity maximum that's trying to develop here as this other wave tries to come off the coast and develop alongside it. So it's generally pretty broad and is very stretched out, and it will eventually develop into some sort of a monsoon trough that ends up happening. And if we look at the tropical Atlantic shot on Saturday here, we have a couple of entities here that end up developing. So this is the wave that comes off the coast in a couple days. This is the wave that we have right now, and you can see that it's kind of part of this very large gyre of sorts. And the trend today has been that there are two separate entities that end up developing. So we have one system here that's very far to the south, and then one system that is able to develop northwest of the Cabo Verde Islands. And the western system is able to kind of sneak under the weakness that is made by Rene here to the north. And this one does not escape the weakness and is able to actually go relatively out to sea. It actually encounters a lot of shear due to the Tut cell that is off to the east of Paulette and actually weakens the system. And then we have this system here that is actually approaching the islands in a couple days, or in about 5 days. So this is definitely something to watch. GFS does have a lot of concerning scenarios here, but one thing to note is that there is still a lot of uncertainty with how this exactly evolves. Typically, we've seen this several times this year. We've had situations with a very large envelope of vorticity here and a couple of waves that are embedded within this, and eventually it takes a while for this really to resolve itself. This is probably the most consistent the GFS and European model have been on. Well, the European model has not been that consistent, but the GFS model has been pretty consistent in showing this solution. If we go back a couple days, you can see it still has these two entities here that result from this very large gyre, and the GFS eventually has this approaching the islands as a strong tropical storm here, which is kind of concerning. So if you're in the Leeward Islands in Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, as this is kind of generally approaching this vicinity, you should probably be preparing for something that may kind of come up on you pretty fast. We'll have more information as this comes in and the days kind of tick down. But for now, right now, it's just something to watch, and do need to always have a plan in place just in case this does come to your area. And the same goes for the people on the northern Gulf Coast here. Always have a plan in place just in case this does develop into something here that may be something a little stronger than what we're looking at here. Right now, it's just a rainfall threat and maybe some winds, but it could be something a little worse. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching.